I don't know whether you guys are actually bought any Bitcoin, but I certainly know that you're interested in it. We've certainly
I have some Bitcoin.
Whoa. Did I just hear that correctly? Can you re-rack that tape, please?
I don't know whether you guys are actually bought any Bitcoin, but I certainly know that you're interested in it. We've certainly
I have some Bitcoin.
Yes, it's true. Billionaire hedge fund manager Ray Dalio owns Bitcoin. He owns a big bag of Bitcoin. I'm surprised. I will admit, I am surprised. Maybe I shouldn't be. After all, Ray Dalio has certainly talked about the coming collapse of the currency. He's often said repeatedly, we featured it here on the show, that cash is trash, meaning that a dollar today is worth less tomorrow. And when you're putting money in a bank, it's continually being devalued day after day after day, month after month. You are losing money if your money is tied to the US dollar.
Cash is all over the place. And even investments, all the investments go up because of so much cash. And how do you find a good investment? But there's so much money, and it'll change the amount that is in the hands of individuals and so on. And so now it's in cash, and that'll move on because cash is trash. I mean, I'd say that because it'll have that negative real return.
Ray Dalio, of course, runs Bridgewater Associates, and it is interesting to think that over $100 billion in assets he is controlling in this hedge fund. Be interesting to know how much of that hedge fund is in Bitcoin. But once again, this underlines this fear-based dynamic that has unfolded over the past week or so, where a number of young, inexperienced crypto traders who were holding large amounts of Bitcoin and Ethereum dumped them over the past few weeks. And who did they sell them to? Well, if you look at the on-chain metrics, they sold them to billionaires. They sold them to long-time bulls, people who are holding like Michael Saylor and Ray Dalio. But it's important here to dissect what Ray Dalio thinks about Bitcoin. He is not as bullish as, say, Michael Saylor, who believes that Bitcoin is not going anywhere and that federal governments are not going to touch it nor worry about it. Here's what Michael Saylor had to say.
Well, the risk of holding dollars is you're losing 1% to 2% of your purchasing power per month with 100% certainty. So that's the position we got ourselves into with the monetary policy. Bitcoin is an asset. It's regulated as an asset, taxed as an asset, designated as an asset. The government's said nothing anywhere in the world. In China, in Iran, in Europe, in the U.S., people are holding this as assets. I think that the banks, their view is they don't want you to challenge a currency like the U.S. dollar, and they want you to pay taxes when you transfer your assets. So for the Treasury Department to say, if you transfer more than $10,000 of Bitcoin, and oh, by the way, you got to pay taxes when you transfer or sell it, that's a totally non-event because that's been the status quo with every asset in the country forever. This is just legitimizing Bitcoin as the apex asset.
That's Michael Saylor, Bitcoin billionaire, who owns $2.5 billion in Bitcoin for his company MicroStrategies. Now, Ray Dalio thinks, though, that maybe the time could be shortened here and that governments could be going after Bitcoin in short order. Here's Ray Dalio's thoughts.
I think Bitcoin's greatest risk is its success because as it becomes more, right now, it's not such a big deal. Fighting it is more of a big deal. And that's it, because it's not that big a deal. As it becomes a bigger deal and more of a threat, let's say people want to sell their bonds and they want to buy Bitcoin. And they want to do that in a bigger way, like buying gold or something in a bigger way. And then there's more transaction. They lose control over that. And that's an existential risk.
I think we're at a real pivotal moment right now. Today of days, you have former Goldman Sachs executive joining Coinbase as a chief policy officer. This is like a flippening in the market. Wall Street goes to crypto. And now you have Ray Dalio and Stanley Druckenmiller, all big institutional investors coming out in favor of cryptocurrency as a potential store of value against a worsening US dollar. What's interesting too is that Ray Dalio, up until just a few months ago, was bearish on crypto. He didn't believe it had a store of value. Here's what he said. Back in November, Dalio began to show a change of heart this year. He said there exists the possibility that Bitcoin and its competitors can fill that growing need for an alternative store of value, he wrote back in January. But of course, underlying all of this is the massive debt cycle and this inflationary period that we are now seeing. Here are Dalio's thoughts on inflation.
First of all, there are two types of inflation. There's the supply-demand inflation, when demand is strong enough and it presses up against capacity, like you don't have enough labor, unemployment rates are low, and capacity is low, and then prices go up, and there's that kind of inflation. And then there's a monetary inflation, which comes from the supply of debt being too much so that they produce more of the money, and the holders of those financial assets, particularly bonds, because bonds is just a promise to receive money that the central bank can print, the holders of that then go into those other things. And then what happens is then you just have to follow the money. So you see who gets the money. And then when they get the money, you see what they do with that money. So let's say if you change who gets the money now, because we're going to change that, taxes will change that, other things will change that.
Dalio thinks this looks a lot like 1971, when then President Nixon took us off of the gold standard and put our currency into fiat mode.
1971, my example. Okay, there's not enough money. You put it down, you devalue. In other words, you sever the link. And then with that, then there's a monetary inflation. You go into those other things, and then you have that. So the risk, let's say there's two risks. We will have a hell of a lot of demand because we put all that money in. Cash is all over the place. And even investments, all the investments go up because of so much cash, and how do you find a good investment? But there's so much money, and it'll change the amount that is in the hands of individuals and so on.
And remember, all government currencies, when they stand on their own, when they are not backed by anything, they've all collapsed. They all have.
Bitcoin is the apex property of the human race. If I had $1 billion and I buy a building in New York City, I can't move it. If I buy $1 billion of Apple stock, it has no tangible value outside of the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ. I can't move it. I can't move sovereign debt around. Bitcoin, if you own $1 billion of Bitcoin, it's available to trade in any currency on any exchange anywhere in the world. I can move it to 1 million different counterparties, and I can take personal custody. And that makes it the highest form of property rights. There's no reason that makes it the least likely thing to be impaired. There's no CEO to screw it up, no board of directors to screw it up. The mayor of New York can't tax it. If the governor of California wants to put a property tax on it, Bitcoin can move to Wyoming.
Where else in the world can we find a decentralized system that can help lift up impoverished people all around the world, is not devalued, debased by any one government? Cryptocurrency. I'd love to hear your thoughts about Ray Dalio picking up a bag of Bitcoin. Drop me a comment below.